Hi, I'm Logan,
Hi, I'm Anna.
and you're listening to Rocket Therapy, the official podcast of Edmonds College Rocketry. Today we are talking about satellites and astronomers, why satellites make some people happy and some people sad. Anna, what are your thoughts?
So, as an astronomy enthusiast, I personally side with astronomers.
So, when you say you side with astronomers, what do you mean with there by siding with astronomers? Is there a definite sides to this?
I like to follow the research community, and this is definitely going to have some sort of impact on data collection within the astronomy community. So, for example, one topic that I'd like to discuss today is SpaceX's Starlink. I believe they're launching 42,000 satellites.
It's a pretty large number.
Yeah, and one thing that's going to be problematic is data collection from ground-based observatories. So this could cause a lot of problems in that sort of category.
Are there any particular observatories that you are focusing on here?
One observatory that I read about was I don't know what its name is, but the one located in Chile. They had, on the first launch, the first 60 satellites to be distributed by SpaceX, they immediately had data results that were damaged from the satellites.
Are you talking about the radio telescope fields in Chile?
It was
Uh,
just a wide view observatory, I think. They were doing a long exposure image where you are collecting light for a long period of time. And this is going to be difficult now with more satellites in the sky because the longer you leave your exposure open, the more likely you'll have white satellite pass over and put a giant white streak through your data.
that does seem to be the main concern. I was interested for a second when you said Chile because have we had some damage to results to data in the other spectrums? Because that would be interesting if this was messing with radio telescopes as well. But yeah, I have seen the pictures from visual spectrum telescopes where you have these giant streaks for long exposures, which I do wonder how much of astronomy now that takes up, or is this a small community that is being given a lot of focus? Not to say that their concerns aren't important. These things cost money. These putting in these large telescopes, and all of a sudden, oh, well, we wanted to progress in our business, so that's to your telescope, right?
Yeah, I feel like, well, not only does it affect just observatories, but it also affects the data collection from, what would you call them? Asteroid hunters? You know,
Oh, NEOs, and near Earth objects.
yeah, it could disrupt detection of objects orbiting near Earth or passing really closely to Earth, but it could also cause damage to the scientific community by a satellite reflecting some sunlight and either blinding a spot where something could be relevant.
Okay, so what SpaceX has actually done? Because there's a good question here of, is this SpaceX's Starlink in general, or specifically, or are we just saying the amount of satellites that are going up there, or the amount that are going up there at once is the problem? Like, what's the root of the concern here?
Well, I think it's a mixture of both because not only is the quantity very large, but we also have these when they come into orbit, they're about as bright as an airplane in the sky, and this is very unusual for a normal satellite. Although, like once they get into orbit, they dim a lot. But SpaceX has been working with ast- astronomers to address these concerns. So they've been, I believe I read they're using shade on the satellites as well as using darkening coats to reduce brightness.
Yeah, it's Vanta Black, and it absorbs something around a 99.95% of light, so it has a really low albedo. We can still see them, but it's not as bad as it could be. That first batch was a lot brighter, and that's where a lot of this upset started, if I remember correctly.
Hmm.
But now it just seems whenever they launch another one, a lot of the community treats it like it's the same batch going up again. And I don't think that's quite fair. Now, they are also taking a while. It takes a few months for them to actually get up to their actual orbit because it's not very fuel efficient to immediately get up there. So they go in these slow bursts. So each orbit, they just boost just a little bit because it's more fuel efficient to boost near your orbital body than farther away. You can get a lot more bang for your buck there. But they eventually do fade out. And I just want to know what the main concern is with them, whether it's they're up there, period, or just they wanted to get them up there more quickly. Like, would this be a problem if it was not SpaceX doing it, but just a bunch of companies also launching this essentially the same amount of satellites together?
Speaking of other companies, actually, yes. I think other companies are planning to do this in large amounts of satellites as well, like Amazon. Uh, but I don't think it's the problem that is just with SpaceX. I think the problem is even though they are taking a bunch of measures to work with astronomers and like have as little impact as possible, there's still going to be some impact. So I think right now they're only at 55% reduction of like the brightness, which I mean now we can't see it from the naked eye, I don't think, but when you have these really advanced observatories looking at the sky, you still get a bunch of data getting corrupted.
So I think part of this is it's an economics question. Like, we do know that there is a limit to Earth-based observatories. That it has to look through the atmosphere, and it's harder to track objects. Where you have, in comparison, the now 30-year-old Hubble Space Telescope up there with the ability to just track an object. You've seen, I'm sure, the Hubble Deep Field
Yeah.
long exposure there. You don't have the problem with the satellites with that one. You don't have the atmosphere, so you're able to get a lot better astronomy data. And it and other telescopes are open to different institutions to reserve time on, but there's still a pricing issue. I mean, it doesn't cost nearly as much to build a little observatory in the back of a university versus launch another Hubble Space Telescope. So it's like, don't worry about it. Science is still going to progress, but for who? So it's is this a word? It's anti-democratization of space to put all these up there.
Well, in addition to the pricing that it takes to launch space telescopes, there's also the concern of maintenance and upgrades. I think right now the only telescope in space that can receive maintenance from astronauts is the Hubble telescope, even though they do, I think, have some plans to launch more. When you compare the two, ground-based telescopes are easier to upgrade. They have less risk of space debris damaging any parts, and like you said, they're much more cost effective.
I wouldn't say cost effective. They're more within economic reach of a lot of institutions. But as far as what you're actually getting out of them, they're limited. You'll never get the same quality picture with an Earth-based telescope as you will one out at the Earth Sun L2 Lagrange point, which is actually where we send a lot of the newer telescopes that just be completely away from the Earth. So they don't have to deal with any satellites whatsoever, not even the ones in geostationary that occasionally pass in front of them. So that's where we're getting all the best possible data from. You just can't replicate that with Earth. I guess my point is, as far as knowledge marching forward, it'll still happen despite this, but it does cut out a lot of the little guy to have all these satellites flying around up there messing up shots from Earth at the same time. I mean, it's messing with them, but the goal of it is, at least ostensibly, to bring the internet to regions which are hard to reach. Because a lot of our internet is still based off of cables, and so that doesn't really help someone in the middle of the Amazon. But now, okay, we could just, whatever you're living in, you can just stick this dish on top of your building, and as long as you have a generator, you have as fast internet as anywhere else in the world. So that sounds pretty great. So it just seems like there needs to be a compromise here, but I don't agree with the attitude of we shouldn't do this. What do you think should actually be done? Just continuing the efforts to mitigate it, or less satellites? How do you envision an ideal partnership here between SpaceX, other companies, and the astronomy community?
Well, I'm also pro launching these. So I actually, despite trying to side with this astronomy, I think a few things that we could do to make the situation better for both sides would be to maybe have the use of satellite tracking and use that to predict when you're going to have a passover so you can plan your data collection in advance. And also maybe in the future planning for deorbit. So I know that these Starlink or not telescopes, satellites have a deorbit plan, which is great. And I think that everything that is launched into orbit should have a deorbit plan.
Everything that is launched into orbit is required to have a deorbit plan or a junk orbit plan. So all low Earth orbits have to have they have a set amount of fuel that once they reach that, once they can no longer maintain the orbit, they have to use it to deorbit. And there's actually a point where most of them go. It's called Point Nemo in the middle of the Pacific, which is the point that's most distant from any landmass. So that's where a lot of stuff ends up. It's the junkyard from space. But speaking of junkyards, in space you have for geosynchronous satellites, the ones that can't actually deorbit because they're too far out there, they actually boost up to a junk orbit where they just stay out there pretty much indefinitely. And they really will. They're not in any danger of coming down into the next thousands of years. So there is that plan. But I think we might want to switch. I think we're going to switch sides a little bit on this. As far as the telling researchers to make a plan, because the other problem child in the room here was the humanity star. Now, could you explain what the humanity star is?
So the humanity star is practically a giant disco ball in the sky. It was about 3 feet in diameter, and I think it weighed about 18 pounds. So it had a lot of surface area and not a lot of weight. So it went down a lot sooner than expected. But
Yep.
pretty much it had a bunch of triangular reflective panels on it that were meant to be seen from the ground. So it had no scientific purpose other than, well, no scientific purpose. It was just to be humanity's star and inspire others. But also, in my opinion, was kind of just another piece of debris.
Yeah. So that was Rocket Lab, and that was, I believe, their first successful orbital mission, and that was a bit of a facepalm. What were you guys thinking? We do want to regulate these things. We can't just say, all right, space is open for business, launch whatever you want as long as you file an orbital path. Okay, what is this thing actually doing, and how is it going to? Because that one was pretty gnarly. But as you said, one thing that came up with that is Rocket Lab said we have its orbital path online, so any astronomers can look at it and plan for it passing over. Well, where does that stop? I mean, imagine if for some reason Starlink satellites had to be that shiny. That would be horrible. And if they were just to say, "Hey, astronomy, just deal with it. We've put all their orbits on, and just turn your cameras on and off really fast to get the shots in between these things." That's not very reasonable. I don't know that can be too much of a mitigation for this. I think I'm going to come on the astronomer side if there's really a battle between them, and say it is on the satellite providers to make their satellites as non-disruptive as possible.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Although I think there's never truly going to be a zero disturbance satellite. Even if they made it so you there's like no visibility, you'll still have a black dot going through the sky, and it could disrupt some other types of data that's being collected. But overall, I think, yeah, the majority of this should be placed on the satellite providers.
Yeah, another interesting thing comes to mind with the black dot. Let's just say we get it 100% light absorbing. And I'm just going to touch on this really quickly. We're throwing a bunch of stuff into space. And if we lose contact with it and it's completely black, how do we track this thing? I know there's other wavelengths that should be able to work, but how well? It seems a little bit dangerous. Have you taken any long exposure pictures?
No, I haven't, unfortunately. The most astrophotography I've done is placing my phone up to my telescope lens. So that is something I'd like to do. Have you?
I haven't. I do remember as a kid going out and watching like meteor showers and looking at the Milky Way. And then it was a cool thing. See if you could find a satellite and learn how to find satellites in the sky. And now it's suddenly a bad thing, but I understand the reason for it. But one completely unhelpful bit of advice I would give astronomers is, hey, stop doing the long exposure stuff. Go to the time lapse stuff. Those are really fun. And there's a few really good videos out there you can find on Vimeo. One's called Ancients, and it's just these time lapse videos of the Milky Way moving across the sky, and you really get this feeling that you're on a sphere spinning around in space, which we are. Of course, that's not necessarily speaking to data, but it's cool.
As an amateur astronomer, I personally love to spot satellites. So I go out at least once a week and stargaze. And one thing I do like to look for, if there's not something really eye-catching out like a good view of Jupiter or the moon, is satellites. Sometimes it's really cool when you get one in the field of view of your lens and it passes through. So I personally love to catch satellites. And I don't think it's going to affect amateur astronomy much at all. The Starlink or even Humanity Star. The Humanity Star and Starlink, I don't think would affect amateur astronomy too much, just because, we don't have as strong of equipment as an observatory. So it's not going to, the only thing that's mainly going to affect our vision other than weather is light pollution from cities.
That is a good point, because at least even without telescopes, that seems to be the biggest annoyance with trying to go out and stargaze is you have to get pretty far out there. It seems harder and harder.
Mm-hmm.
So were you with us on our last camp rocket launch trip?
I've never been on a rocket launch trip.
Oh, I thought for you I at least went on one of them.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, we got some pretty good views, and it just being out in the middle of nowhere. That's great. It's not satellites that are bugging me. It's the city lights. You miss it, and then after I've gone years, and then finally seen the Milky Way again. It's like, oh, there you are. I missed you.
There's a cool thing that you can do. You can attach this to your telescope, and it will filter out a lot of light pollution.
Is it a polarized lens?
Yeah, I think so. You can go on a website, and I know they track the space station, and you can plan out when it's going to pass over you, but I'm pretty sure there's other satellites or websites that show a lot more satellites, and you can kind of just plan for what times.
Yeah, it's unless you're looking for a specific one, it's pretty easy. If you could see the stars, you could find satellites. They have this strange motion. I mean, we sometimes they get confused with a plane, or you think a plane might be one, but when you see one, you're like, no, that's definitely a satellite. It's kind of eerie how they move.
Mm-hmm.
You can almost tell that they're following a curved path that's a lot farther out there than the plane is. So it's hard to describe, but once someone points them out, you're like, okay, I could spot these.
Well, sometimes they're a little brighter, but most of the time it's like you'll be looking at a certain spot in the sky, and then your eye will just catch something moving, and it will just be a really faint dot.
Yeah, that is another thing though. You have the the constant on off. I mean, there's the ones that are always shining when they're above, but the ones that are rotating, you get a very steady on off.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I think we nailed it. Satellites are good. Astronomers are wrong. No. I think we agree that we don't want launch to be the Wild West. We want there to be some rules here, so we're not stepping on each other's toes.
Yeah.
As long as they keep cooperating with each other, I don't think this will be much of a problem outside of what social media might try to make it from individual groups. I think we're on the right path here. So this has been fun. It's great talking to you, Anna.
Great talking to you, Logan.
You have been listening to Rocket Therapy, the official podcast of Edmonds College Rocketry. If you are interested in joining the Edmonds College Rocketry, please see our contact info in the description box. Thank you for listening. And remember,
up is easy and down is hard.